Hello, this is Joel from joelfries.com, and welcome to the second chapter of Beej's Guide to C Programming. So let's jump right into it. He basically asks us, what is programming anyways? Basically, what he ends up telling us after a few funny jokes here is that it's a way for us to tell a computer to perform a task. Obviously, like we saw in the last chapter, we do this by typing in some commands. But in order to do that, we need to basically know what we want and break it down. And as BJ points out here, it's not going to be great at first, and he looks back in his life and college and says that the code he made back then is quite possibly the worst he's ever written. But you know, let's not worry about that. Let's just get started learning the code, and you know, we always go up from there. So the first thing we need basically is an idea of what we want to build, or our goal of what we want to happen. And he makes a point of saying we need to figure out a way to break this down. We need to look at the pieces and find out how each piece of our task corresponds to a piece of instruction that the computer can do. So he gives us an example right here. Implement a program that will calculate the sum of all numbers between 1 and the number the user enters. And then we should also have this program display that result to us. So we need to think of what are the steps we need to have this actually happen, to have the computer do this for us. And as a beginner, you won't really understand the steps that, or the tools that the computer has that you can use to accomplish this, but he gives us kind of the steps anyways. So it's going to be, the program needs to be able to read a number, it also needs to be able to compute that number, and it needs to be able to output this result. And you know, as I mentioned earlier, he also makes note of it that we don't really know that these are the pieces that we need to break down, right? Because how do we know that the code for someone to read, for the computer to read a number into its CPU is easy, right? That in our head could be a million lines of code. But he just says that we kind of have to learn over time, and that we just have to take this for what it is. And these 3 steps are kind of the correct way to break this down. So as we continue, he'll basically tell us that it's okay and that we should just keep moving, and that over time we're going to learn how to break these steps down ourselves. So he basically goes on to tell us how the computer breaks down these steps. First of all, to read a number from the keyboard, we use this command right here, scanf, and to compute these numbers that we give it, we will use a for loop. And also to print the result, we will use this command right here, printf. Now we don't have to know what this is right away, he just wants us to know that this is kind of the process that you use to break down a task that you have. And he puts it all together for us right here on how to do this. Now, I can tell you that this code will actually not run, and I'm not going to tell you why, because that's going to be kind of a challenge for you in a later chapter or a later post I'm going to make. So continuing on, he gives us a real example. Oh yeah, before that, he also says, you got to realize that it's going to be a lot of time, and the work that gets, you know, the results that you get for all this work isn't going to be pretty. You aren't going to be making Doom 3 right away. You're going to be making something more similar to, hello, I'm a computer and I know how to do math. But you know, over time you will get to that point. And he also says that, you know, over time you're going to make code that you can reuse, or you're going to find that people have already made code and they allow you to reuse it. And he gives some examples of, you know, GTK library or OpenGL for making 3D graphics, stuff like that. Okay, so here is where we actually get to understand a real-world example of C code and how every line works. So let's start with this right here. He tells us that this is a comment, and basically what a comment is it allows us, the programmer, or anyone else that we give this source code to know what's going on. Because sometimes just looking at the code, like earlier, it gets so confusing. So comment is a way that the computer doesn't care about it, it just skips over it when it's executing, but you as a programmer can read it, and then you can actually understand what's going on. So this line right here is an include statement, and what it's including is something called stdio.h, which is a header file, and within that header file it's a bunch of more code that actually gets copied right into here that allows us to use commands such as printf for standard input and output. So for example, in this program we are outputting hello world to the screen, so we need to include stdio.h, which has a whole bunch of code, just like up here how we don't have to write everything out. We just have to do this printf, and then there's more code that actually, is the underlying work that gets this on our screen. He also mentions this int main void. Main is basically what gets run first when we run this application. So we call other methods within this main method, or actually I think I'm using Java terms, I think they call it a function. So within this function here, we can call other functions like printf, and we're printing hello world to the screen with this function printf. And then return 0 is basically a way to tell the computer that, okay, we've ran through everything correctly and it looks good. Now we're going to go into other finer points, like what does this int mean, and why do we actually have to do this return 0 in later modules and later chapters. So that, I believe, is pretty much it. So let me just go ahead and run this code right here, give an example of how it actually works. So let me just copy it up. And I'm going to launch my terminal here. And we're going to type nano, which is basically just a text editor. And we're going to say this is going to be called our first.c for our first program. Hit enter. Now we are in a kind of a text editor, and we're going to paste that code like so, and now we're going to save it. Yes, we want to save it. Yes, we want to call it this. Now if you remember from the last chapter, the way to compile code by typing gcc -o for where we want the output file. We'll just call it first. Oops. And then we give it the file name, which is first.c, where our code is held. Hit enter, it's compiled. Now to run this code, we type /first and enter. And here we see hello world. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this second chapter overview, and I'll see you in the next chapter.